Okay, we're going to talk about Focal Paint's brush engine and maybe some other confusing things. With Focal Paint, you can make some pretty expressive brushes like this one, pretty detailed, or you can have brushes that are very blocky, much more simple. You can even have brushes that are kind of goofy, different shapes. Try something like that. There we go. So the way all these work is through the brush engine, and that is if you click on brushes, you could click on a brush, click it again, and it'll bring up the brush editor, or you can press the little gear up here at any time to bring this up. So the way this all works is you have this concept called the lookup table. So this is a grid, and if you drag this around, you can kind of see it says in and out. And what happens is for every input, you'll get an output. And if it's a straight line like this, you'll notice that everything you get in, you get out again. So in this case, it's like you get exactly in what you get out. But obviously that wouldn't be very fun. So you can change it. You can make it flat like this one. If you see a flat line, you'll always get, no matter what you send in, you'll always get what you have. You'll always get the same output. So this is always going to be 1. So this is sort of like setting a base value. I don't have a base value interface, so this is like kind of just as good almost, if not more confusing. Let's see what else. So like if you wanted to start at a different base, you could just move this up so that even at the lowest, even if your input is 0, you'll get 0.5 out. All right, so how do these actually interact with the settings? Opacity is pretty obvious setting. So you can see here, we have a curve or a lookup mapping that's direct. It's 1-to-1, so everything you put in, you get out. But what happens to this is that it gets these modifiers or operators. They get combined together. So let's explain this better. Controller AX is this guy on the x-axis. So you get A, and the left to right is going to be from 0 to 1. And so we're basically setting our opacity to be this. We're using the equal operator. So if I drag this all the way to the left, that's 0, I can't draw at all because it's going to be 0 no matter what. So that's actually not that great. So if you put it in the middle, actually just put it all the way to the side, and we'll see that we can draw, but color. I can also press very lightly and still have a low opacity. And the reason why is because after this is set to that, we're then multiplying it by the pressure. So then low pressure, 0. 0 times whatever this was is going to be 0. And the only way to get to 100% is to push really hard. So that's how the power of this is that you can mix and match all these different operators with all these different inputs and do a lot of different things. Let's see. So you can also reuse these things because a lot of times you want to have things linked together, sort of. So in this case, I have all these different settings linked together with the same mapping here. And you can reorder these. You can reorder these because the order does actually matter. It'll process these starting up here. It'll go down this list with each of these, processing them in top to bottom, basically. So let's see. We have opacity controlled by this controller AX and the pressure. We have dab size controlled by AY. So you can see if I drag this straight up, it's much bigger. If I drag this down, much smaller. And let's see, dab angle. This is a neat one. So we are adding to our dab angle whatever our stroke direction is. And that is why, let's change the color again. Can I ever pick a good color? Maybe I shouldn't say that. This is a great color picker. So if I draw a circle, you can see it's always changing its direction. It's not always, so it kind of follows my direction, which is what you normally want. But if I turn that off for some reason, like let's just say I just hold this down. That's how you actually delete things. Now it's not being controlled at all. And you can see the difference that makes. Now what you could also do is control that instead of the direction, instead of the direction is like, it doesn't matter how I'm holding the pencil, it's going to be whatever direction you see it moving on the screen. But let's clear that. Let's get something like that. If I make that instead the pencil azimuth, it's not a great word. It's basically the direction you're holding the pencil if the pencil was like on the face of a clock. So now, no matter how I move it, it's not going to change as long as I don't move the pencil. Now I'm going to turn the pencil. I'm going to turn it again. You can see that, yeah, the angle's not changing based on direction anymore. It's the pencil azimuth. Alright, so that's kind of neat. Let's go to dab hardness. I've mapped this over to controller BX, which is this way and this way. So hardness kind of makes sense. It's the edge of the dab. You can see here it's pretty hard there. So if I kind of move it off to the side, now you can see that it's getting softer. So it can be good for when you're trying to blend. It's a soft edge. Alright, this is one of my favorites, smudge amount. This one I've got it mapped to the controller BY, which is up and down here. So smudge is how much of the paint color you've picked is actually put down compared to the color that is on the canvas and picked up. So let's see, if it's 0, like right now, all it is the color I have picked over here, other than the fact that you can see through it. So if I crank it all the way back up, now it doesn't matter what color I have here. It could be white. It's not going to put that white color down. It's only going to smudge around the colors on the screen. It could be very fun. Along with that, here's smudge length. You might recognize some of these terms from other programs, especially MyPaint. This is the length or the because you could say the sample frequency, or you could say how quickly the color gets picked up. And yeah, so let's show how that works. I have this mapped to pressure. So if I press very lightly, it's going to change the color pretty quickly. So it'll like fade out, or it'll switch from, you know, this dark color here, and now it's picking up the orange now. Now it's picking up, you know, it's good for blending, but you won't be able to smear it around a whole lot because it'll kind of quickly fade out. But if you press harder here, it'll go up to 1 eventually. So you can actually pressing really hard now. So I can just keep dragging this color around forever if I press really hard, because 1 is infinite. So now as I loosen the pressure, bring the pressure down, or let up a little bit, it lengthens that and lets me now blend it in with the rest of the colors on the canvas. So it's a nice way to be able to pick up color and then let it go again. Let's see. Stamp rate, because the iPad is not totally amazing as far as processor speed, does have limits, especially when you're not the best programmer. And we can, and you may not always want to stamp as much as possible, but if I bring this way down, you'll see that it doesn't stamp very often. Let's actually get rid of smudge so you can see this better. Yeah, very slow stamp rate. So you can either set this to whatever level you think the brush needs with a flat line like this, so it'll always be 0.6, or you can have it be modified dynamically. You notice in this case, or every case really, it doesn't matter what your input is if you have a flat line. So you can use speed, you could use random. I usually use random just so that it's sort of obvious that I didn't pick a particular input. Doesn't really matter at all though. So here, we get stamp rates higher. Let's clear this, pick a different color. And go all the way up. And now you can barely even tell there are stamps. Alright, let's look at another brush now. The shape brush is just kind of a fun brush. Let's change color. So let's go over this one. We got our standard mapping here. The dab angle is being changed. The aspect ratio, okay, that's a neat one. The AY controller is controlling this. So if it's all the way up to 1, the ratio is going to be 1:1, so it's square, circle, whatever. And as you bring it down, it's going to get squished until it's very thin. So the minimum you can do is 1:10 ratio, 0.1 basically. And now let's see, on the shape here, we have it mapped to the BX, this guy here. So this is at 0 to the left here. It's going to be a round. And of course, if you change the aspect ratio, you'll get ovals. Goodness, what am I doing here? All right, here we really thin, really squished ovals. And as you move the dab shape to 0.5, you'll get a mix with like a average of two different shapes, an ellipse or circle and what's called a super ellipse. Let's go all the way over to, this is 100% super ellipse. And let's see it there here. So a super ellipse can look almost like a square when you're at 0.5 roughly. We're doing the dab shape modifier. So to make this clear, the shape, circle or super ellipse, left and right, and the modifier, which is by, it only changes the shape, or it only modifies the super ellipse. So there's nothing to modify with the normal ellipse, as far as I know. So this changes like an exponent on that, if you look up Wikipedia. So down here it's like 0.1 maybe, and then here it's 0.5, and then up here it's like 20, maybe it's 10. So the highest level, you get this shape that's almost like a square with rounded corners. And then down here you'll even get like a star shape. Very pointy star. Right in the middle here is very sensitive to where it shifts. Alright, so that's kind of neat. What do these other guys do? This opacity here is actually 100%, obviously. It's just flat, straight across. I don't know why I put that. I think I originally had it like this, but not as fun for a shape brush. Stamp rate, very low, because I wanted the shapes to be separated. And dab hardness, I wanted that to be very high, so you could see the shapes easily. Jitter, oh yeah, I wanted this, so this is using two things. So I think if I remove this one, it was a little too jittery for me. So by multiplying it as well, essentially it's like I'm adding a small amount to it, and then I'm also multiplying it by the same small amount, so it's like just kind of a double effect to make it even smaller, but still something. Let's see, dab size also randomized, and I wanted the update frequency. Not sure why I put that all the way up, but probably because it doesn't matter. So the update frequency is a performance thing. It's basically how frequently do you recalculate all these things. If it's at 1, it's going to recalculate all these settings for every touch that it picks up. And if you bring it down all the way, it'll still update, but it'll be more random. It'll be less often, for sure. Okay. All right, we should talk about the offsets more, because it's very confusing. Let's clear this. All right. If you just make a new brush, clicking on this little plus button, you'll get a default brush. Anyway, so let's just see what happens when this little brush. Opacity is mapped to pressure. Let's remove that. Then let's change it to offset direction, and we'll add random. So immediately you can see a bunch of random dots are appearing. If we bring this down quite a bit, let's clear this again. You can see now it's, well, you can't see where I'm pressing, but it's only going to one side of my dots. In fact, we can demonstrate that by something like this. So when you do using a random input, you're basically saying that for half the time, don't offset because it's 0, and the other half time, ramp it up all the way up to here, to 0.3. So now you'll see that where the darker line is where my pointer is, and we're offsetting to the right, basically. So usually you don't want to offset to just one side. You want to make it go on both sides, so you can just drag this down to the negatives. This is one setting. The direction, the offsets do take negative values. Most settings are from 0 to 1, but a couple of them are from -1 to +1. So now we will see them in both directions. And we can do the same sort of thing and make a middle portion by doing that. So you can see the middle part is mostly not being offset. So it's pretty obvious that there's not a whole lot of dots going on. So what I usually do is I'll add another lookup table thing and erase the default. And then I'll change the stamp rate. And you can just set it to use equal if you want. And then you can just crank that thing up. Let's try that. Let's try 0.7. Still not a whole lot. Let's crank it all the way up. It's a little better. So it still looks like noise, so you could group these. So if you have little stair steps stuff going on, you can create the effect of like bristles. Let me show you here. So you can see on one side they're a little more arranged systematically compared to the bottom. This bottom here is the straight line here, and these little rows are these stair steps. So you can just kind of, don't need to be really too crazy about it. And the editor's a little funny because it's just trying to be helpful. But you generally won't notice if there's small things like that. So there we go. Now the neat thing here is, it's really big. And you could adjust all these to make it smaller, but that would be tedious. So what you can do is make another table here, and we can pick the same setting. We're use the mouse here, offset direction. So we can pick that same setting, and we want to scale it. So we want to multiply it by something. We can multiply by pressure. That might be kind of neat. So using this low pressure, we're going to scale that whole thing to 0, and pressing hard will just make it like it is now with 1. Okay, so let's clear this. So pressing lightly, we get a small. Pressing harder, it's getting wider and wider. does go a little slow when you do this. So what if we can try throwing the update frequency on here? If we subtract, might be a little better. Oh yeah, you can see how terrible that is. When it's not being updated a lot, it can't draw all those. Yeah, that wasn't any good. Let's delete that. So there's another sort of optimization here. It's another setting. There's a thing called cluster count and cluster jitter and cluster spread. These are pretty funky. Let's go ahead and let's control these with the little controllers here, so it's easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to add to that using controller BY. Alright, so you can't tell, and you can't really tell because they're not. What this is doing is for every dot it's drawing, it's also drawing a whole bunch of extra dots, like little clones. But they're in the same spot. So the only way you could tell is if you were doing like at low opacity, you would notice they're much darker. So we can add another setting called cluster jitter. And we'll do the same thing, but we'll do the BX controller. Alright, so now with no jitter, looks like this. I'm going to increase the jitter. And you can see what's happening is every dot that we were drawing, we're now just like blasting a whole bunch of little dots all around it. The nice thing about those little dots are they're very cheap as far as computational speed, since they're little clones. Crank it up all the way. So that's maximum jitter. I'm gonna use color. I can't get dark colors. There we go. If I crank it all the way up, BY all the way up, you can see there's so many little dots that it's going slow actually. But since we have this now, we can actually go back and reduce our stamp rate because now we have another way of making more stamps. So now it's actually much faster. We can bring this down a lot more. Alright, so that jittering is a little too much. There's one other setting. Cluster spread. This one I will map it to let's do AX. So let's go ahead and not jitter so much. Alright, so we're not jittering much at all. And now I'm going to increase spread. So you can see what it did here, sort of. No spread, spread. So it like kind of takes the cluster and it spreads them out instead of in a random way, which is what jitter does, like that. It spreads them out in a way, in the same way that you were offsetting your dabs. So it continues that direction that they were being offset before. So if you do just a little bit of everything, you can get decent effects. All right, that's a lot. That's kind of how these brushes work. Except I spend more time making it better. So we have our stair-step offset azimuth, and our cluster counts are controlled with our AX and AY. I'm using pressure for smudge amount. This is a nice thing to do so that you can blend with light pressure, and then as you press harder, it'll do more paint. It's mostly just it's just for convenience, not really realistic about how a real paintbrush works, but it's nice to be able to do that. Let's see. Here I'm multiplying the offset by the controller BY. That's effectively giving me the size of the brush. So bring it all the way down. It's pretty small. As I bring it up, it just expands that. It's really just scaling this. Smudge buckets. These things, not really all that necessary, but see, I have them. A smudge bucket is like it sounds. It's a bucket where the paint goes when you smudge. So if you had like a line like this, and you were, let's pick another color. If you did something like that with yellow and blue, and you wanted to like blend up and down, it's smaller. Okay, so there, you kind of see here, the colors are mostly staying where they are. Okay, undo that. I've done this. If I don't use these smudge buckets, if I just have it set to be the same smudge bucket, you're going to see something quite different. Yeah. It all got muddled together pretty quickly. So the reason why this is working like this sort of is because it's basically correlating each one of the buckets to the random value, which is the same value that I was using for this offset. So whenever the random value was 0.1, it was always being offset by -1, which is like to the left, and therefore it was always getting assigned this particular smudge bucket, getting 0.1. So what happens is that gets multiplied by 255, because there's, well, 256. There's that many smudge buckets. There's 256 of them, so this gets all mapped to from 0 to 256. So you can have like 256 different colors kept in a memory, sort of, and recall them automatically. So that's how that works and why that exists. Very low level, sort of. Let's see what else is in here. It's confusing. Talked about dab angles. So I mapped this to controller BX, the dab angle here. I'm adding and subtracting at roughly 0.25, which this ends up being in radians. So that's I think that's 90 degrees. Yeah. So that way you can take your brush, let's make it a little smaller, and instead of it being always aligned with my azimuth, my pencil, I'm holding the pencil this way, I can turn this thing and change the angle of the way this sort of flat brush is being held, because we don't have pen barrel support yet on Apple devices. So you can kind of do that, rotate it. Takes some getting used to, but can be more convenient than having to twist the whole canvas or use your arm in an awkward position. Plus, if you're doing trees or something, you could be happy little trees, and then do the other side with this angle, something like that. Some of these things are just there to counteract some other effect. So if this is shrinking the azimuth offset with pressure inversely, sort of. So if I remove this, if I remove it entirely, pressure makes it get way bigger, and the reason is because the offset is actually linked to the size of the dab, and I'm making the dab size bigger with pressure somewhere buried in here. Here it is. So if you make the dab size bigger, you'll inadvertently make the offset bigger too. And so, like I said, you can kind of just reload that brush to get that back. There it is. So I'm shrinking it so that it mostly stays the same size, even from small dabs to bigger dabs. It gets just a little bit bigger. You could tune that if you really want it to be perfect, but it's kind of good enough. Let's see.